Good morning, good morning. It is another fabulous Friday. It is a great day for us to be able to transition into the next chapter, the next week of learning and growing in this fearless food freedom, right? Hope you guys have been having a great time. I cannot believe I am starting our week 6, covering over chapters 5. That means we've only got 3 more weeks, and you guys will have a really great foundation, a really great way to be able to continue to pursue being fearless about your food freedoms, right? So this morning, it's kind of cold here. We have 20 degrees less than it was yesterday, so it's kind of shocking for my system. But I thought it was kind of perfect. I made myself a cocoa drink. So it was a tablespoon of cocoa powder, right? Cocoa powder with no sugar. Put about 5 drops of stevia, and then a drop of cassia with a drop of lemon. And it's really super yummy hot water. Emulsify it with my wand. So it reminds me of the Christmas truffles that were available back in December. If any of you were able to snag any of those yummy truffles inside the boxes or little, box bags that they were sold in, there were 4 of each flavor in the truffles. So there was the lemon cinnamon, and then there was the peppermint one as well. And I wanted something a little bit warming this morning, so I chose the cassia and lemon because cassia is going to be our oil for this week. So that was kind of fitting. So it's nice and yummy, and so it gives me that truffle in a drink rather than in a candy, right? And no sugar load. So we're gonna dive on in after I take a sip of my yummy liquid truffle. So this week in the slow down diet, week 5 week 5 to him, week 6 for us, because our intro was our first week, right? It's all about the metabolic power of pleasure. So vitamin P, pleasure, is a vital element that makes our meals nutritiously complete. It makes life worth living. When we eat, we are seeking the pleasure of food and avoiding the pain of hunger. I really like that. Removing vitamin P, pleasure, and the nutritional value of our food plummets. So when we take away pleasure, when we take away the enjoyment of food, then we are actually sabotaging our metabolism. When we add vitamin P, your meal is metabolically optimized. And here's a really interesting study that he shares. In a fascinating animal study, scientists surgically destroyed the nerve centers of rats' brains that enabled the rats to taste. One group of rats was thus left with no ability to taste their foods. A second group, normal, healthy, and luckier creatures who could still enjoy their meals, was used as a control. Both groups were fed the exact same food, ate the same amounts, and were treated by researchers with the same manner of rat respect. In due time, every rat that couldn't taste died. The surprised scientists needed to find a cause of death, so they autopsied the animals. They found that even though these rats ate the same healthy amount of food, they nevertheless died of clinical rat malnutrition. Their organs had wasted as if they'd been starved. The moral of the story is that taste and pleasure are essential to life. That's kind of profound, right? I mean, think about that. That if we don't experience pleasure from our food, it's not going to nourish us. I mean, it did not nourish them one bit. So again, it goes back to, we obviously, when we slow down with our eating, then we're going to really be in tune with what is truly creating pleasure. When we don't slow down, we think that all the different things that we're grabbing for and we're shoving down is creating pleasure, but it's soothing whatever emotion or whatever turmoil we're in at that moment, right? And instead, when we start slowing down, when we take the steps like he talks about in this book, at this point, at week 5, we should have slowed down our meals so much that we can truly recognize whether something is providing pleasure for us, right? In our food. Now, forgive me, I have a little bit of a lingering cough, but much better than last week. So if you deny yourself the pleasure of food through low-calorie eating, or if you restrict yourself to a fun-free diet, the body responds by chemically demanding pleasure and satisfaction. The lesson that neuropeptide Y teaches us is that we cannot escape the biological imperative to party and enjoy. No matter how stingy we are with eating, the body will not be denied. So the body wants to, one way or another, have some sort of pleasure in what we're providing for it, right? And if we don't, then it's going to try to figure out one way or another how to do this. Many of us claim to love food, but when it's eaten too fast or without awareness or with a helping of guilt, the central nervous system and the enteric nervous system both register only a minimal of pleasurable sensation. The result is that we are psychologically driven to eat more. We're compelled to hunt down the pleasure we never fully receive, even though it's continually within our grasp. And that's why it's so important for us to slow down with our meals, so that we can truly engage our brain with the moment of eating, to eat when we eat, right? The keys to pleasure's powerful effect in balancing your appetite is that it promotes a physiologic relaxation response. The time we overeat most are when we're anxious, stressed, or unaware. A relaxed, pleasured eater has natural control. A stressed eater produces more circulating cortisol, the stress hormone we keep coming back to. What's amazing is that cortisol desensitizes us to pleasure. So we want to make sure that cortisol is only used in our body when it truly needs to be used, and not have our body in this chronic fight or flight mode, right? We need to eat more food. So when cortisol desensitizes us to pleasure in our day-to-day stresses, we then end up needing to eat more food to feel the same amount of pleasure as when we're relaxed. This means that if you're afraid of pleasure, or anxious about gaining weight, or frightened to eat a dessert, you'll generate more cortisol. This chemical will swim through your bloodstream, numb you to pleasure, and ironically create the very self-fulfilling prophecy you feared from the beginning, which is, if I eat something fun, I won't be able to stop. Can you see how this nutritional fear helps create our metabolic reality? So pleasure loves to be slow. Pleasure is an essential antidote. So it goes back to previous chapters, right, of slowing down to truly engage with your food, and to not feel guilty about enjoying something that you might deem non-nutritional from time to time, right? So putting pleasure in perspective. Epicurus is acknowledged, this is on page 107. Epicurus is acknowledged as the ancient authority on the pleasures of the palate. We honor this Greek patriarch whenever we describe a dish as an epicureal delight. Few realize, though, that Epicurus was not some gluttonous pleasure junkie. He was actually a simple and austere man who chose his pleasures with great care, chose them wisely, and enjoyed them deeply. Perhaps his entire philosophy on pleasure is best summed up in his own words. This is his quote: "It is impossible to live pleasurably without living wisely. Well, and justly, and it is impossible to live wisely, well, and justly without living pleasurably. I find that many people either fear the pleasure of food and do battle with it, or constantly succumb to their food desires with little restraint. Both do damage to the body and the psyche. Epicurus hints at a middle way. Using pleasure wisely means welcoming it with delight. It means including healthy pleasures and being moderate with the unhealthy ones, so they do minimal damage at the least and leave us metabolically enhanced at the most. And isn't that what we're all striving for? I remember years and years and years ago hearing all things in moderation, right? And I think to a certain extent this really relates to this in that no, there are some foods that truly are not beneficial to our bodies, especially foods that are highly processed, lots of dyes, chemicals, things like that. That's really not food, right? So we're not really necessarily talking about the non-food eating items. We're talking about food that is handcrafted, that is made with love, or that is maybe lacking a little bit in nutrition or a lot in nutrition, but we're wanting to enjoy it for the occasion, for the holiday, for whatever it is. And making sure our mind is not full of muckiness is key and vital so that our metabolism can continue to be the amazing furnace that it was designed to be for us. And so that means we have to dig deep in the roots of where do our food fears come from sometimes. Health is pleasurable. Page 110. Health is pleasurable. Healthy food is pleasurable. A food in its natural state is pleasurable. A food in its freshest state is pleasurable. A high quality food is pleasurable. A creative dish is pleasurable. Food that retains its personality, its charm, and vital force is pleasurable. Most of us don't have experiences like this all the time, and the reason is this: we're fast-paced, fast food, fast exercise lifestyle closes a doorway of perception that decreases our pleasure threshold. Eating fake pleasure foods is no different than sleeping with a stand-in person, right? Could you, those of us who are married, could you imagine being intimate with somebody outside of your marriage bed? Could you imagine, if you're a single person, being intimate with somebody who you have not dedicated your life to, as God had designed us to be? Could you imagine just, I could not imagine. So it's one of those things that we have to remember, that we don't want something unauthentic, right? Christ is authentic. He is true. He is our compass, right? So we want authentic food to continually steer us towards Him, to steer us to not have muckiness in our mind. So if we're going to enjoy a candy bar, let's say, for example, rather than going and picking up a Snickers that's going to be full of chemicals and corn syrup and different things, right? Go to the natural store and find a high quality organic candy bar that has, organic cocoa, has organic sugar or organic honey or agave in it, all the different things, so that your taste buds can burst with pleasure from that candy bar. Don't gyp yourself on quality, all right? Enjoy the pleasure of quality. Built for sweet. This is so cool. Excuse me. Another piece of the puzzle that joins pleasure with metabolic power is sweetness. We are built for sweet. As you may recall from the earlier lessons in biology, humans have 4 types of taste buds on our tongue: sweet, salty, sour, and bitter. And bud for bud, we have more of the sweet variety of taste buds on our tongues than any of the others. And those vast amounts of sweet taste buds are mostly positioned toward the front and center portion of the tongue, where the greatest amount of our food tends to land. So we need to, even me, who I don't tend to really be drawn to sweets. I tend to be drawn more towards savory and creamy kind of stuff. But I am aware that if I continue to deny myself even fruit or different things, that I am denying my body's natural instinct to enjoy sweetness. So, and it will start feeling deprived, and then it will create an imbalance. It will create an imbalance in my psyche, in my emotion, in my insulin, in my physiology, all of that. But we must monitor our dosage of pleasure as we would any other powerful drug. You must also make sure you're getting enough. So from an evolutionary perspective, sweetness is a biological reward. It gives us a reason to keep living. Have you ever noticed that after eating a meal, you just want a little something sweet? And that can even be a small taste of someone's dessert that would satisfy you. That's your central nervous system calling for vitamin P. Pleasure through its specialized nerve ending called sweet taste buds that often need just a minimum of excitation to satisfy this key component of the cephalic phase digestive requirement. So I think, and I want you to check in with yourself and see if this makes sense, that a lot of times when we have that sweet tooth right after a meal, we either, one, deny it, and so then we continue to let it spin in our head. Before we know it, either hours later or the next day, we binge on something sweet, or we continue to beat ourselves up and we continue to deny until days later or weeks later, we binge overly. Or we give in to it right after a meal, but we don't really truly stop and enjoy that piece of chocolate or that bite of ice cream or that little bit of dessert or even that hard candy. We just real quick wolf it down to just satisfy it, but it doesn't really satisfy it, right? But if we stopped to say, you know what? I'm going to feed this pleasure of a sweet tooth after this meal. It was a great meal. I'm going to enjoy this hard candy, or I'm going to enjoy this chocolate. I'm going to sit here and I'm going to savor it. And then I'm going to go clean the kitchen, or I'm going to go do XYZ. Our entire being will be satisfied versus feeling deprived or hidden in fear, right? So we've seen that healthy fats are essential to life as well. All right, and here again, it's about balance, right? When something is required for our biological existence, it feels good. But since fat is inherently pleasurable, it will call to you again and again like a distant voice in your nutritional wilderness, tempting you to break a rule that you think is cosmic law, but it has been erroneously created by highly fallible nutritionists, doctors, and experts. In a study at Bowman Gray University, scientists separated monkeys into 2 groups, and this is really key. The first group received a regular fat monkey diet, while the second group received a no-fat monkey diet. After a period of time, the researchers observed that the monkeys eating the normal amount of fat behaved like normal monkeys, playful and active. The monkeys on the no-fat diet became agitated and violent, with some monkeys nearly killing each other. All right, so it is key to remember balance. All right, so there's so many different types of diets out there, right? There's the keto, which is really, really high fat, and that might work for some people. I've played with keto off and on and all that stuff. So I'm not saying, and And there's some really great research and science about how it is supportive for different learning disabilities, as well as for different diseases, for joint and brain, and just so many different things, different keys. So finding what is right for you is extremely important. And this is what I have found also, though, that we need to remember that we're talking healthy fats, right? Not processed, overly processed fats. So we're talking things like avocados, nuts, seeds. Those are the ones that really, olives, those are the ones that really stand out for me. Coconut, actual coconut flesh, because it's mixed in and all that stuff. So something that I've been learning a lot with the different whole foods, plant-based eating and all that stuff, is that we have learned how to recognize that sugar is highly processed, right? Especially when it's not organic and all that stuff, and that flour is highly processed. Some people's bodies, period, regardless, don't process these different types of foods. But when we take sugar in its natural form, it actually can be beneficial and therapeutic for our body. When we take wheat, again, if a person doesn't have a gluten issue, and especially if they're living in a country that there's not all of this stuff going on with wheat, or any food that has, gluten, when we take it in its natural form and process it ourselves, then again, it's not stripping it away of its nutrition. It's the same thing with fat. So when we are eating our fat in its whole form, we're also getting fiber, a little bit of other nutrients, of carbohydrates and protein and other things all mixed in, like in an avocado, right? But when we remove all of the other elements of the avocado and leave just the avocado oil, it can still be beneficial, but it's still processed. So then that's when we have to be even more conscientious and aware of how much even processed oil are we using, or processed fat are we using. And I've been becoming more and more mindful and conscientious of that as well, of seeing how my body responds that way. So play with that as well, of understanding that there's a balance with that. But the study is really profound in helping us understand that our body does need fat, especially our brains, because our brains are over 60% fat, and so they need fat to be able to nourish and to be able to function. Our joints need fat, but it doesn't have to be, we can remember the whole foods that are higher in fat that will do exactly that and will be a better natural source for our bodies, and so much more satisfying. I have so much fun doing things with avocados and nuts and seeds that I can easily go overboard with those, and coconuts. So, and if you're wanting to have your own, say, coconut milk, make your own coconut milk with coconut flakes. Have fun, experiment. Wanting your own nut or seed butter, make your own, so that you have fun and the pleasure of being able to create something. So experiment with that. So ending up this chapter, when pleasure is made forbidden, we never truly receive it. The body yearns for it, and we do great battle against it, or we give it infective substitutes such as low fat, low taste, mass-produced foods that leave us unfulfilled. So it's time for a new approach. So your task this week is, after you enjoy your forbidden pleasure, notice how you feel. Does your body react to this food in any way? Does the food enhance your energy level or drain you of energy? What happens to your mood? How do you feel the next morning? Check in with your gut wisdom. Should this food be excluded from your diet, or is it really something you need? Can you eat it occasionally and make it work? The choice is yours. That is like the best advice for this week, is to take away the guilt of enjoying something pleasurable that you would normally deem, probably for me, if I did not, I will test this out. because there are upgraded versions of it. I used to love Oreos. Oh my goodness gracious. Oreos were absolutely my favorite, but we know how highly processed they are, and they got all kinds of junk and whatever. So, but there's some really great gluten-free, organic options out there. So that is going to be my challenge for this week for myself, is to enjoy and partake in a plate of upgraded Oreo cookies with a wonderful glass of cashew milk, all right? And to truly, or maybe, dipped into my wonderful cocoa drink. Now that's an idea. So think of what it is that you just think in your mind is just like a guilty, food that you should never partake in. Upgrade it, make it quality, and enjoy it. And then check in with your body afterwards. See how does it make you feel? How does it make your mind feel? Is it something worth putting back into your diet? Or is it something that I really shouldn't, because it messes with me too much. Messes with me physically, mentally, emotionally, and release it, okay? So that is our metabolic power chapter. So now we are going to check in with Sonja Corbitt and see how this chapter weaves in with the metabolic power of pleasure. So the chapter 5 is A Fearless Desert, Advanced with Confidence. Once we've begun conquering, this is like the very first chapter, or very first paragraph in this chapter. Once we've begun conquering our demons, we can advance with confidence, but oh joy, learning to love with abandon happens most effectively in the desert, where we're stripped of everything we depend on. Its lonely austerity teaches us detachment, self-discipline, self-knowledge, and how to apply the strategies of spiritual warfare we've learned so far, such as battling temptation immediately and directly, practicing custody of the mind and our thoughts, and confronting the lies with the truth of God's word. Unfortunately, the desert is necessarily uncomfortable, and we automatically chafe at its rigor, not realizing in our ignorance that resistance is fundamentally evil. So, how does this relate? The desert can be pleasurable because there is growth to take place. Do we need to learn how to experience the fruits of the food with confidence? So it almost seems like these two chapters are absolute opposites, and in a way they are. One is telling us to find pleasure, and the other is about barrenness, right? Denying. But they both are about getting to the true pleasure of the one and only God, of truly satisfying us. And the more we check in with that, the more we're going to find pleasure in the whole foods, in the wholeness, in quality of what God's trying to provide for us. And we're going to quit trying to substitute it with counterfeits and artificiality. Page 116. By manna's nature, relying on God for their daily bread was compulsory for the Israelites. And unless we develop the discipline ourselves, it's in the desert where God removes our attachments to financial security and comfort that we learn it too. So the Israelites lost the pleasure of what God was doing for them because they got so caught up in complaining about their woes, right? And how many of us, if we're struggling with an illness or struggling with weight or struggling with something that we say, well, we can't have that. And so it's shifted our mindset of all the things that we can't have or that we're, denying ourselves or this or that. And we don't really appreciate what we do have. The Israelites had this manna, this sweet bread that actually changed itself for each person's individual, taste buds, so that it was pleasurable to each person, regardless. One person might have thought it tasted like cinnamon, and another might have thought it tasted like, peppermint sticks, but it was pleasurable to their palate. But yet they complained about it. And could it be because they didn't stop to really enjoy what they were receiving? And instead, in the back of their mind, they were rushing to the next task, or rushing of thinking, when am I going to get to have something else? Instead of just being in the moment. Does Jesus not like rich people? Does he require that those with means sell it all and give it away? Yes, he does, if it captures our hearts and hinders us from giving ourselves and our all to him. The illusion of security it leads. So why I circled that is, again, when we allow certain foods to constantly swim in our mind, to capture us, it hinders us. It doesn't allow us to live in freedom with that food. The devourer or destroyer, page 118, is anything that steals the seed, destroys the blade, sabotages with weeds, and consumes the crop, famine, insect, or enemy, and is actually a proper name for Satan. So you can't advance in confidence if you're suspicious or terrified that God won't provide for you, because your effort and attention will always be toward your physical needs rather than the miraculous way forward. And don't we learn to trust in his provisions in the scarcity of the desert, giving and receiving? All right, so here, when we fear even the fruits, all right, the fruits, the food, we are in bondage to not find pleasure even in the gifts that are obvious, that are right there in front of us. Cutting up an apple into tiny little diced pieces, taking that time, and then putting a drop of cassia and a drop of lemon and shaking it up, and then enjoying each bite that way, enjoying the burst of flavor, or just cutting up an apple, period, right? And enjoying or biting into it and feeling the juice just go down your face, and enjoy the sweetness of that fruit. If you're not sure whether your possessions possess you, and here, food, examine how you feel about giving them away. All right, can you give up your processed treats to find pleasure in the whole natural fruits? So that's key. I want you to think about that this week. Think about how many times we think that the processed stuff is going to create pleasure for us. And they really don't. They leave us empty. But when we go to something that is full of nutrition, full of life, full of energy, and then it fills us up with life and energy, and it allows us to be able to live authentically, right? The children of Israel teach us that the desert can be a barren place of great temptation and fear. But from Jesus, we learn the desert can also be a place of purposeful isolation and the removal of distractions, a place of calling and mission and great graces. The enemy uses the desert to tempt us to focus on the shortage. We need the desert to teach us to be fearless so that we can advance in confidence. Every desert season presents an important choice. Detach from the comforts of the world and learn to trust God, or yield to the flesh. The desert is actually God's primary training ground. So when we are trying to break free from fearing food and what it can do to or for us, we need to lean on God's training. We need to trust, right? We need to remember that he has us in the palm of his hand. And when we stop, when we breathe, when we take in all the beauty and the glory that he has provided for us, we have a deeper appreciation. We're able to find great pleasure in that simple fruit, that simple vegetable. So in conclusion, let's see. Yeah, in conclusion, when I am afraid to trust God's word, I must make faith a matter of will and action rather than emotions. My emotions will follow my will. So I want you to really hone in on that this week of finding pleasure in your food, but also finding pleasure in authentic food. And don't sacrifice the same way we don't sacrifice our relationship with God, right? We want to have an authentic, real relationship with God. We want to have that same authentic, real relationship with food. Attempting to hear, so here is a quote from St. Augustine. He says that fasting and almsgiving are the two wings of prayers that enable the soul to gain momentum and to fly even to God. So here's my challenge for you, is rather than fasting necessarily from a food this week, fast from fear. All right, take everything that I have said during this video, and if you need to replay it, you need to, take notes, do that. And fast from fear, because, dear ones, you guys are almost there. Like I said, this is week 6. We have 3 more weeks, and you will have an amazing foundation of being fearless in your food freedoms. All right. I look forward to hearing from you guys, posting questions, wins, all sorts of things. Take this lesson today and really prepare your hearts and go forth into your new week to be able to be fearless, to be authentic, and to find the power of pleasure in food. All right? You guys have a fabulous Friday. Take care and God bless.